The morning alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just like every other day for the past 3 years. Rosa rolled over in her small apartment bed, staring at the cracked ceiling above her. Through the thin walls, she could hear her neighbor's baby crying, and the sound of traffic already building up on the street below. Another day, another dollar. As her grandmother used to say, she dragged herself to the tiny kitchen and made instant coffee with water that took forever to heat up on her old stove. The coffee maker had broken 6 months ago, and buying a new one wasn't exactly in the budget. Neither was fixing the leaky faucet that dripped all night, or replacing the light bulb in the bathroom that had been flickering for weeks while waiting. For the coffee, Rosa glanced at the corner of her living room where her old upright piano sat covered with a sheet. Dust had settled on top of it, and a stack of unpaid bills sat on the bench where sheet music used to be. She hadn't touched those keys in 2 weeks. Every time she sat down to play, the worry about money crept into her mind, making it impossible to focus on the music. The framed diploma on her wall caught her eye as she sipped her coffee. Bachelor of Music Performance, it read, from the state university where she'd spent 4 years learning everything about classical piano. Her professors had told her she had real talent, that she could make it as a performer if she worked hard. Enough, that was 5 years ago. Now, the diploma just reminded her of the student loan payments that showed up in her mailbox every month like clockwork. At 7 a.m. sharp, Rosa caught the bus to Romano's Italian restaurant. The ride took 45 minutes, and she used the time to go over her section assignments in her head. Tuesday mornings were usually slow, but lunch could get crazy if the business crowd from downtown decided to venture over to their part of town. Romano's wasn't the fanciest place in the city, but it wasn't a dive either. The red checkered tablecloths were always clean, and Mr. Romano insisted on fresh flowers on every table, even if they were just carnations from the wholesale market. The walls were covered with old photographs of Italy and fake ivy that collected dust no matter how often Rosa wiped it down. She pushed through the kitchen doors at 7:30, tying her apron around her waist. The cooks were already prepping for the day, chopping vegetables and stirring sauces that would simmer for hours. The smell of garlic and oregano filled the air, making her stomach growl. She'd grabbed a piece of toast at home, but that was hours ago. Rosa. Table 6 needs their coffee refilled, and Table 12 is still waiting for their check, called out Jenny, the other morning waitress. Jenny had been working at Romano's for 8 years and knew every customer's usual order by heart. She was good at her job, but Rosa sometimes wondered if Jenny ever thought about doing something else. The morning passed in the usual blur of taking orders, carrying plates, and making small talk with customers. Rosa had gotten good at the routine. Smile, take the order, suggest the daily special, bring the food, check if everything's okay, drop off the check, clean the table, repeat. Her feet ached in the cheap shoes she'd bought at the discount store, but comfortable restaurant shoes cost more than she made in 2 days, around 11 a.m. During the lull between breakfast and lunch, Rosa found herself wiping down the same table. For the third time, her mind started to wander, and without thinking, she began humming a piece by Chopin that she'd learned in college. The melody flowed out naturally, the way it always did when she wasn't paying attention. "What's that tune you're humming?" asked Mrs. Patterson, one of the regular customers who came in every Tuesday for coffee and a blueberry muffin. Rosa felt her cheeks warm up. "Oh, it's nothing. Just something I heard on the radio," Mrs. Patterson smiled. "You have a lovely voice. Dear, do you sing?" "Not really," Rosa replied, spraying the next table with cleaner. She couldn't exactly explain that she'd spent 4 years studying music and could play pieces that most people had never even heard of. It felt too complicated, too much like bragging about a life that didn't exist anymore. The lunch rush started at noon, and Rosa didn't have time to think about music or anything else. Orders came fast, and the kitchen got backed up when the new cook burned a pan of chicken parmesan. She ran back and forth between tables, apologizing for delays and trying to keep everyone happy. During her break, Rosa sat in the back alley behind the restaurant, eating a sandwich that the cook had made for her. The bread was a little stale, but the turkey was fresh, and she was grateful for the free meal. Money was so tight that she'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner more often than she cared to admit. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through social media, seeing updates from her college friends who were doing exactly what they'd dreamed of doing. Lisa was performing with a regional orchestra, posting pictures from concert halls and recording studios. Mike had gotten a job teaching music at a private school and was always sharing videos of his students playing pieces Rosa had learned years ago. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she'd made different choices after graduation. Maybe if she'd been more aggressive about auditions, or if she'd been willing to move to New York or Los Angeles where there were more opportunities. But her mom had gotten sick right after graduation and Rosa couldn't leave town. By the time her mom recovered, Rosa was already working at Romano's to pay the bills, and it became harder and harder to find time for auditions and practice. The afternoon crowd was different from the lunch rush. Mostly older folks who weren't in a hurry, business people having late meetings over coffee, and the occasional family with kids who made a mess that Rosa would have to clean up later. She moved through her section on autopilot, her body knowing exactly what to do while her mind drifted. At 4 p.m., her shift finally ended. Rosa counted her tips in the back room, hoping she'd made enough to cover groceries for the week. $43.67. Not great, but not the worst day she'd had either. Combined with her hourly wage, it would be enough to buy food and maybe put a little aside for the electric bill. The bus ride home was crowded with people getting off work, everyone looking tired and ready to be anywhere else. Rosa stared out the window at the city passing by, watching people walking with purpose to places she'd never been, lives she'd never live. Back in her apartment, Rosa kicked off her shoes and rubbed her sore feet. The piano sat in the corner, still covered with its sheet, still carrying its layer of dust. She walked over and pulled the sheet away, revealing the worn wooden bench and the keys that had once felt like extensions of her own fingers. She sat down and lifted the lid, running her fingers over the keys without pressing down. They were out of tune, probably had been for months. Getting a piano tuned cost money she didn't have, but playing an out-of-tune piano felt worse than not playing at all sometimes. Rosa pressed middle C, and the note rang out flat and hollow in her small apartment. It sounded nothing like the beautiful instruments she'd learned on in college, nothing like the grand pianos in the concert halls where she'd once imagined herself performing. She closed the lid and covered the piano again. Tomorrow would be another early morning, another day of taking orders and carrying plates and pretending that this was just temporary, that someday things would change. But deep down, Rosa was starting to wonder if this was just her life now, and if dreaming of something else was just making it harder to accept what was real. Friday nights at Romano's were always different. The restaurant filled up with people who had money to spend and time to enjoy it. The lighting was dimmed, candles flickered on every table, and Mr. Romano himself would walk around greeting customers like they were old friends. For Rosa, Friday nights meant bigger tips, but also more demanding customers who expected everything to be perfect. She arrived at work that evening feeling hopeful. Her rent was due in 3 days and she needed to make at least $60 in tips to cover it. The dinner crowd was already starting to gather when she clocked in at 5 p.m., adjusting her black uniform and making sure her hair was pulled back neatly. The evening started well enough. Rosa's section filled up quickly with couples celebrating anniversaries, families having dinner together, and groups of friends catching up over wine and pasta. She moved between tables smoothly, remembering orders without writing them down and keeping water glasses filled. Around 7:30, a group of 4 well-dressed people was seated at table 12 in her section. Rosa could tell immediately that they were different from the usual Friday night crowd. The men wore expensive suits, and the women had jewelry that caught the candlelight. They ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than Rosa made in a week. The man who seemed to be leading the group had perfectly styled gray hair and spoke in the kind of confident voice that was used to being listened to. His name was Robert Wellington, though Rosa wouldn't learn that until later. He owned several businesses downtown and was known for throwing money around when he wanted to impress people. Rosa approached their table with a friendly smile. Ready to take their dinner orders. She could smell expensive cologne and noticed that the woman closest to her had a purse that probably cost more than Rosa's entire wardrobe. Good evening, everyone. Have you had a chance to look at the menu? I'd be happy to tell you about tonight's specials, Rosa said, pulling out her order pad. Actually, we're still deciding, Robert said, not looking up from his menu. But you can bring us another bottle of that wine, the same one. Of course, sir. I'll be right back with that. As Rosa walked away to get their wine, she found herself humming softly under her breath. It was a habit she'd picked up recently, something that helped her stay calm during busy shifts. The melody was from a batch piece she'd learned in college, something light and cheerful that matched her mood about. The good tip she was expecting when she returned with the wine bottle, Robert was telling a story about his latest business deal. Rosa began pouring the wine carefully, starting with the women as she'd been trained to do. The humming continued quietly, almost unconsciously. Excuse me, Robert said suddenly, holding up his hand. What is that you're humming? Rosa felt her stomach drop. She hadn't realized she was doing it loud enough for anyone to hear. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. No, it's fine. I'm just curious. What was that tune? Rosa felt her cheeks getting warm. It's just something. I know, nothing important. But Robert wasn't going to let it go. He had the kind of personality that liked to be the center of attention, and he'd found something interesting to talk about. It sounded classical. Do you know classical music? The other people at the table were looking at Rosa now, waiting for her answer. She wished she could just disappear into the kitchen, but she had to respond. I studied music in college, she said quietly, hoping that would be the end of it. Instead, Robert's eyes lit up with amusement. Really? Our waitress is a musician. He said it loud enough that people at nearby tables turned to look. What did you study? Singing? Guitar lessons at the community center? Piano, Rosa answered, wishing she'd never started humming in the first place. Piano, Robert laughed, and his friends joined in. Well, isn't that something? And now you're serving us dinner. I guess the music business didn't work out too well, did it? Rosa's hands were shaking slightly as she finished pouring the wine. Can I take your dinner orders now? But Robert was just getting started. He'd had enough wine to make him bold, and he was enjoying the attention from his friends in the nearby tables. I bet you thought you were going to be the next great pianist, didn't you? Playing in concert halls, recording albums, all that glamorous stuff? Sir, if you're ready to order. Rosa tried again. Oh, come on, don't be shy. Tell us about your musical career. I'm sure everyone would love to hear about it. Robert gestured around the restaurant, and Rosa realized that more people were listening now. The conversation at other tables had gotten quieter, and she could feel eyes on her. One of the women at Robert's table, a thin blonde with too much makeup, giggled and said, Maybe she can play Happy Birthday for us. Do you know any simple songs, honey? Rosa's face was burning now. She could feel the stares from other customers, could see some of the other waitstaff watching from across the room. Even Mr. Romano had noticed the commotion and was looking over with a concerned expression. I'll just go get your dinner orders. Taken care of, Rosa managed to say, backing away from the table, but Robert wasn't finished. Wait. I'm really curious about this. You spent 4 years studying piano, and now you're working here. That's got to be quite a story. What happened? Did you realize you just weren't good enough? The question hit Rosa like a slap. She knew he was just being cruel now, enjoying the power he had over someone who couldn't fight back. But the words still hurt because they echoed the doubts she had about herself every single day. Everyone has to make a living, sir, Rosa said, trying to keep her voice steady. Well, sure, but most people don't spend years studying something they're never going to use. I mean, what was the point? You could have learned a real skill, something practical. His friends were laughing openly now, and Rosa could hear whispers from other tables. She caught fragments of conversations. ... thinks she's an artist. ... probably not even that good. ... serving tables where she belongs. ... The worst part was that Rosa couldn't defend herself. She couldn't tell them about the recitals she'd given in college, about the professors who'd praised her technique, about the pieces she could play that would amaze them. She was trapped in her uniform, holding a wine bottle, being judged by people who knew nothing about her real abilities. Mr. Romano appeared at her side, his face serious. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, looking between Rosa and Robert's table. "Oh, everything's fine," Robert said with a big smile. "We were just learning about our waitress's hidden talents. Did you know she's a pianist?" "Well, was a pianist. Now she's discovered her true calling in food service." More laughter from his table. Mr. Romano's expression didn't change, but Rosa could see the concern in his eyes. Not concern for her feelings, but concern for his business. These were the kind of customers who spent a lot of money and brought their friends. Rosa was just an employee who could be replaced. "Rosa, why don't you let Jenny take care of this table?" Mr. Romano said quietly. "You can handle the bar section." "Tonight." Rosa nodded, grateful to escape but humiliated that she was being moved because of the situation. As she walked away, she could hear Robert's voice carrying across the restaurant. "I guess some people just have to learn the hard way that having dreams and having talent are two very different things." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of shame and anger. Rosa could feel people looking at her differently now, like she was some kind of joke. The story of the musical waitress spread through the restaurant, and she caught customers at other tables talking about her, some laughing, others looking at her with pity. When her shift ended at 11 p.m., Rosa had made only $38. In tips, word had gotten around, and people seemed to think her story was more entertaining than her service. She walked to the bus stop feeling smaller than she had in years, wondering if tomorrow would be even worse. The weekend passed slowly for Rosa. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the restaurant, replaying Robert's words over and over in her mind. Every time she tried to sit at her piano, she heard his voice asking if she just wasn't good enough. The keys felt cold under her fingers, and the music that used to bring her comfort now seemed to mock her. Monday morning came too soon. Rosa dragged herself to work, hoping that the Friday night incident would be forgotten by now. Maybe it was just one bad evening and things would go back to normal. But as soon as she walked into Romano's, she could tell something had changed. Jenny was at the coffee station, filling sugar dispensers. When she saw Rosa, she gave her a sympathetic look. "Hey, you okay? I heard about what happened on Friday." Fine," Rosa said quickly, tying her apron. It was no big deal. But it was a big deal, and Rosa knew it. Word had spread beyond the restaurant. Romano's had a reputation in the upscale dining scene, and Robert Wellington was well connected in the city's social circles. The story of the waitress who thought she was a musician had become dinner party gossip. The morning shift started, quietly enough. The usual breakfast crowd came in, construction workers grabbing coffee before their shifts, elderly couples sharing pancakes, business people reading newspapers over their eggs. Rosa moved through her routine, hoping for a normal day. Then, around 11 a.m., she saw a familiar face being seated in her section. Robert Wellington was back, and this time he wasn't alone. He had brought 5 other people with him, all dressed in expensive clothes and carrying themselves with the confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. Rosa's heart sank. She considered asking Jenny to switch sections, but Mr. Romano was watching from behind the register. He'd made it clear after Friday night that he expected his staff to handle difficult customers professionally. Losing wealthy clients wasn't an option. She approached the table with as much dignity as she could manage. "Good morning. Can I start you off with some coffee?" Robert looked up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, if it isn't our musical friend." "Everyone, this is the waitress I was telling you about, the one who went to college for piano." The people at his table looked at Rosa with curious expressions. She recognized the look. It was the same way people might stare at an unusual animal at the zoo. "Interesting, but not quite human. Rosa, isn't it?" Robert continued. "I was just telling my friends about our conversation the other night. They found it quite fascinating." One of the women at the table, wearing a pearl necklace that probably cost more than Rosa's car, leaned forward. Is it true you studied classical piano for 4 whole years? Rosa felt trapped. She couldn't lie, but she also couldn't escape the conversation. Yes, ma'am. Can I get you something to drink? 4 years, the woman exclaimed to her companions. And now she's here. It's like something out of a movie, isn't it? The struggling artist working in a restaurant, an older man with thick glasses, and a condescending smile added, I suppose not everyone can make it in the arts. It takes real talent, not just wishful thinking. Rosa's hands clenched around her order pad. These people didn't know anything about her abilities, her training, or what she'd sacrificed to get through college. They were judging her based on her uniform and her circumstances. I'll give you a few more minutes to look at the menu, Rosa sighed, trying to back away, but Robert wasn't done. Actually, Rosa, my friend here is Dr. Phillips. He's a music professor at the university. He was saying that he sees students like you all the time, people who think they have talent but just don't have what it takes to make it professionally. Dr. Phillips nodded importantly. It's quite common, actually. Students graduate with these grand dreams, but the reality is that very few people have the skill level required for a serious musical career. Most end up doing something completely different. The smart ones realize it early, added another man at the table. They don't waste years chasing impossible dreams. Rosa felt like she was suffocating. The conversation was getting louder, and she could see other customers turning to listen. Some looked uncomfortable, but others seemed entertained by the spectacle. Sir, if you're ready to order ... double quoza tried one more time. Oh, but we're having such an interesting discussion, Robert said. Dr. Phillips, didn't you say that most amateur pianists can barely handle simple pieces? What was that term you used, technically deficient? That's right, Dr. Phillips said, clearly enjoying the attention. Most people who claim to play piano can stumble through a few basic songs, but they lack the technical foundation for anything complex. They might fool themselves, but they certainly couldn't fool anyone who actually knows music. The words hit Rosa like physical blows. She thought about the Chopin nocturnes she'd mastered in college, the Bach inventions she could play from memory, the concertos she'd performed with the university orchestra. But standing here in her server's uniform, none of that seemed to matter. I bet she can't even read music properly, laughed the woman with the pearls. Probably learned a few songs by ear and thinks that makes her a pianist. Or maybe she's one of those people who took lessons as a child and never progressed beyond Fur-Elise, added Dr. Phillips with a chuckle. Rosa's vision was starting to blur with unshed tears. The humiliation was worse than Friday night because these people were being deliberately cruel. They were educated, sophisticated people who should have known better, but they were treating her like entertainment. Mr. Romano appeared at her elbow. Rosa, is there a problem here? No problem at all, Robert said cheerfully. We were just discussing music education with your employee. Very enlightening conversation. Mr. Romano looked between Rosa and the table, clearly unhappy with the situation but unwilling to offend paying customers. Perhaps we could focus on your lunch orders? Of course, Robert said. But first, I have to ask, Rosa, do you ever miss playing? Or have you accepted that some dreams just aren't meant to be? The question was designed to hurt, and it succeeded. Rosa felt something break inside her. All the doubt and disappointment she'd been carrying for years rose to the surface. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had been fooling herself all along. I'll send Jenny over to take your orders, Rosa managed to say. Her voice barely above a whisper. She walked away. She heard Robert's voice carry across the restaurant. Some people just can't handle the truth about their limitations. It's actually kinder to help them see reality. The rest of her shift was a nightmare. The story spread through the dining room like wildfire. Other customers looked at her with mixtures of pity and amusement. Some tried to be kind, but their sympathy felt almost worse than the mockery. During her break, Rosa sat in the back alley and called her sister Carmen, the only person who knew how much music had meant to her. They don't know you, Carmen said fiercely when Rosa told her what had happened. They don't know what you can do. You were amazing in college. Your professors loved you. Maybe they were just being nice, Rosa said, wiping her eyes with a paper napkin. That's not true, and you know it. You won competitions. You performed solos. You were good enough to get into graduate school before Mom got sick. But Rosa couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she'd been living in a fantasy. Maybe the cruel people at the restaurant were right, and she'd just been too stubborn to see it. When she got home that night, Rosa looked at her piano and felt nothing but shame. She pulled the cover over it and promised herself she wouldn't touch it again. Some dreams, she thought, were too painful to keep alive. The week that followed was the worst of Rosa's life. Every shift at Romano's felt like walking into a battlefield where she was the only target. Robert Wellington had become a regular, showing up every few days with different groups of friends, all eager to meet the delusional waitress they'd heard about. Rosa tried to avoid his section, but Mr. Romano had noticed her reluctance and wasn't happy about it. You can't pick and choose your customers, he told her during a staff meeting. Everyone gets treated the same, no matter what happened before. But it wasn't just Robert anymore. Word had spread through the city's social circles like a virus. The story had grown and changed as it passed from person to person. Some people heard that she'd claimed to be a concert pianist. Others heard that she'd tried to audition for famous orchestras and been rejected. The truth didn't matter anymore. Rosa's coworkers started treating her differently too. Some were sympathetic, but others seemed embarrassed to be associated with her. Jenny still tried to be friendly, but even she seemed uncomfortable when customers brought up Rosa's musical background. Maybe you should just tell people you never studied music, Jenny suggested one day while they were folding napkins. Then they'd stop talking about it. Rosa considered it, but lying felt like giving up the last piece of who she used to be. Even if she couldn't play professionally, even if her dreams had died, the music was still part of her. Taking that away felt like erasing herself completely. Thursday afternoon was slow at the restaurant. Rosa was wiping down tables in the back section when she heard Mr. Romano's voice coming from his office. The door was slightly open, and she couldn't help but overhear his phone conversation. "Of course, Mr. Wellington, I completely understand your concern," Mr. Romano was saying in his most professional voice. "Yes, she's been with us for 3 years. Very reliable employee," Rosa froze, realizing they were talking about her. She knew she shouldn't listen, but she couldn't make herself walk away. "A demonstration?" Mr. Romano continued. "Well, that's certainly an interesting idea. You think your guests would enjoy that?" Rosa's heart started pounding. "What kind of demonstration were they talking about?" "The piano has been here for years," Mr. Romano said. "It's mostly decorative, but I think it still works. We had it tuned when we first opened, but that was, probably 5 years ago now." Rosa had noticed the old upright piano in the corner of the dining room. It was covered with a lace cloth and used as a display table for fake flowers and wine bottles. She'd always assumed it didn't even work. "Saturday night would be perfect," Mr. Romano continued. "Our busiest evening." "I'm sure it would be. Educational for everyone involved." Educational. The word made Rosa's stomach turn. They were planning something, and she was pretty sure she wouldn't like it. "Oh, I agree completely," Mr. Romano said with a laugh. "Sometimes people need to face reality. It's a kindness, really. Better to know the truth than live in a fantasy." Rosa backed away from the door, her hands shaking. Whatever they were planning, it involved her and that old piano. She thought about confronting Mr. Romano directly, but she knew how that would go. He'd deny everything or tell her she was being paranoid. The rest of her shift dragged by. Every time she looked at the piano in the corner, covered with its dusty cloth and surrounded by fake plants, she felt sick. What were they planning to make her do? Friday morning brought the answer. Mr. Romano called Rosa into his office before her shift started. He was sitting behind his desk, trying to look casual, but Rosa could see the excitement in his eyes. "Rosa, I have some exciting news," he began, gesturing for her to sit down. "Mr. Wellington has made a very generous offer. He'd like to book our private dining room for a special dinner party tomorrow night." Rosa waited, knowing there was more coming. "Now, he's heard about your musical background, and he thought it would be wonderful if you could provide some entertainment for his guests. Nothing fancy, just a few songs on the piano. He's willing to pay you an extra $100 for your time. $100. It was more money than Rosa usually made in tips during an entire weekend. She thought about her overdue electric bill, her empty refrigerator, the rent that was due next week. I don't think that's a good idea, Mr. Romano, Rosa said carefully. The piano probably doesn't even work properly, and I haven't played in a while. Mr. Romano's smile didn't waver, but his eyes got harder. Rosa, Mr. Wellington specifically requested you. He's bringing some very important people tomorrow night. Business leaders, community members, even a reporter from the city paper. This could be great publicity for the restaurant. But I really don't think. Let me be clear, Mr. Romano interrupted, his voice losing its friendly tone. Mr. Wellington has become one of our best customers. He brings large groups, orders expensive wine, and always tips well. He's also recommended Romanos to several other wealthy clients. Rosa understood the implication. Robert Wellington was valuable to the business. She was replaceable. I know this might seem intimidating, Mr. Romano continued, but it's really a wonderful opportunity. You'll get to share your musical talents with an appreciative audience. And like I said, there's an extra $100 in it for you. Rosa looked around the small office at the faded photographs of Italy on the walls, at the stack of bills on Mr. Romano's desk. She thought about her own bills, her empty savings account, the job market for waitresses in a city full of restaurants. What if I can't do it? She asked quietly. What if the piano doesn't work or I mess up? Mr. Romano shrugged. Then you tried your best. That's all anyone can ask for. But Rosa, he leaned forward, his expression serious. Mr. Wellington was very specific about wanting you to perform. If you refuse, it might look like you're not willing to go the extra mile for our customers. And in this business, attitude is everything. The threat was clear but unspoken. Refuse, and her job would be in jeopardy. Romano's was already looking for reasons to cut staff during the slow winter months. Rosa couldn't afford to be seen as difficult or uncooperative. When would this be? Rosa asked, knowing she was trapped. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. The private dining room will be set up for about 20 guests, all very sophisticated people. You'd play for maybe 30 minutes, just some background music while they have dessert and coffee. Background music, Rosa almost laughed at the cruelty of it. They weren't asking her to perform because they believed in her talent. They wanted her to play so they could judge her, criticize her, and prove their point about her limitations. I'll need to practice, Rosa said finally. The piano will need to be tuned. Already taken care of? Mr. Romano said quickly. I've arranged for a tuner to come in this afternoon. And you can stay after your shift today to practice if you want. I'll pay you for the extra time. He had it all planned out. Rosa realized this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment idea. Robert Wellington had been setting this up for days, maybe weeks. The phone call she'd overheard was probably just finalizing the details. What kind of music should I play? Rosa asked, feeling defeated. Double quotes. Oh, anything you're comfortable with. Maybe some of those classical pieces you studied in college? I'm sure Mr. Wellington's guests would appreciate something educational. That word again. Educational. Like she was a teaching tool, a cautionary tale about failed dreams and unrealistic ambitions. Okay, Rosa said, because she didn't have any other choice. I'll do it. Mr. Romano's smile returned, bright and false. Wonderful. I knew you'd see this as the opportunity it is. And Rosa, this stays between us for now. Mr. Wellington wants it to be a surprise for his guests. Rosa left the office feeling like she'd just signed her own execution order. She had less than 24 hours to prepare for what felt like a public humiliation disguised as a performance. The worst part was that everyone involved knew exactly what they were doing to her, and they were enjoying it. Rosa barely slept Thursday night. She lay in her small bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with everything that could go wrong. The piano at Romano's hadn't been tuned in 5 years. What if it sounded terrible? What if her fingers were too rusty? What if she froze up in front of all those people who already thought she was a joke? Friday morning came too early. Rosa dragged herself to work, her stomach churning with anxiety. She could barely focus on taking orders or serving customers. Every time she looked toward the corner where the old piano sat, her heart started pounding. Around noon, a man arrived with a leather case full of tools. The piano tuner was a quiet, elderly man named Luis who'd been working on pianos for 40 years. Rosa watched him remove the lace cloth and wine bottles from the piano, revealing the worn, wooden surface underneath. "When was this last tuned?" Luis asked Mr. Romano, running his fingers over the keys. "Oh, probably 5 years ago, maybe more." "We don't really use it?" Luis shook his head and opened the piano lid. Rosa could see him wince slightly at what he found inside. This is going to take some time. The humidity in here hasn't been good for it. For the next 2 hours, Luis worked on the piano while Rosa tried to do her job. She kept glancing over, watching him adjust strings and test keys. Some of the notes sounded dead and flat, while others rang out sharp and harsh. "It's the best I can do with what I've got to work with," Luis told Mr. Romano when he finished. "Some of these strings really should be replaced, but it'll hold a tune for a few days. Just don't expect it to sound like a concert grand." After Luis left, Rosa stood in front of the piano during her break. The black and white keys looked familiar, but foreign at the same time. She pressed middle C softly, and the note rang out clear but thin. It wasn't the rich, warm sound she remembered from her college piano, but it would have to do. Her shift ended at 4 p.m., and Mr. Romano had arranged for her to stay and practice until the restaurant opened for dinner. Rosa pulled up the bench and sat down, her hands hovering over the keys. It had been 3 weeks since she'd played anything, and her fingers felt stiff and uncertain. She started with simple scales, working her way up and down the keyboard. Her muscle memory slowly began to return, but her timing was off. The piano's action felt heavy and unresponsive compared to what she was used to. Some keys stuck slightly, and others seemed to require more pressure than others. Rosa tried playing one of the easier pieces she remembered from college, a simple Mozart sonata that she used to play as a warm-up. Her fingers stumbled over passages that had once been effortless. She'd forgotten how the second movement started, and her left hand couldn't seem to find the right rhythm for the accompaniment. Panic started to set in. If she couldn't even play Mozart properly, how could she perform in front of Robert Wellington and his friends? They were already expecting her to fail, and now it looked like she would. Rosa forced herself to slow down and think. She needed to choose something she knew really well, something that was impressive enough to prove she had real training, but not so difficult that she'd make mistakes. She thought through all the pieces she'd learned in college, trying to remember which ones had come most naturally to her. Then she remembered Chopin's Minute Waltz. It was a piece she'd loved in college, something that showed off both technical skill and musical sensitivity. More importantly, it was a piece she'd performed successfully before at a student recital during her junior year. Her professor had complimented her interpretation, saying she brought real emotion to the music. Rosa began working through the waltz slowly, relearning the fingering and phrasing. The piece was more challenging than Mozart, with rapid runs and delicate ornaments that required precise control. But as she played, her confidence began to return. Her fingers remembered the patterns, and the music started to flow more naturally. The waltz told a story. It started playful and light, like someone dancing without a care in the world. Then it became more dramatic and intense, with sweeping phrases that rose and fell like emotions. Finally, it returned to the playful opening, but with more complexity and depth. Rosa worked on the piece for 2 hours, playing it over and over until her back ached and her fingertips were sore. The restaurant piano wasn't ideal. Some notes were slightly out of tune, and the tone was thinner than she preferred, but she began to adapt to its quirks. Jenny stopped by during the dinner prep to listen. "That sounds beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed. "I had no idea you could play like that." "Thanks," Rosa said, taking a break to stretch her hands. "I just hope I can remember it all tomorrow night." "You will. It's like riding a bike, right? Once you learn something that well, it stays with you." Rosa wasn't so sure. There was a big difference between playing alone in an empty restaurant and performing in front of people who were looking for reasons to criticize her. Stage fright had never been a big problem for her in college, but this felt different. This wasn't a supportive audience of fellow students and encouraging professors. These were people who wanted to see her fail. That evening, Rosa went home and sat at her own piano. It was still out of tune, but it felt more familiar than the restaurant piano. She worked through the Chopin waltz again, trying to memorize every detail. She practiced the tricky passages slowly, making sure her fingers knew exactly where to go. Her neighbor knocked on the wall around 10 p.m., a signal that she was playing too loudly. Rosa switched to practicing silently, just moving her fingers over the keys without pressing them down. She visualized the music in her head, hearing every note and feeling every phrase. Saturday morning brought a new wave of anxiety. Rosa's hands were shaking as she got ready for work, and she could barely eat breakfast. She kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if she forgot the music in the middle? What if her hands cramped up? What if the piano went out of tune again? At work, the day seemed to drag forever. Rosa made mistakes with orders and forgot to refill water glasses. Her mind was completely focused on the evening ahead. Every time she looked at the piano, now set up in the private dining room, her stomach did a little flip. Mr. Romano was excited about the evening. He kept mentioning the important guests and how this could be great for business. He'd ordered special flowers for the tables and had the good wine glasses brought out from storage. "You're going to do fine," he told Rosa during the afternoon. "Just play a few songs, smile, and be gracious. These are cultured people. They'll appreciate good music." But Rosa knew better. She'd seen the look in Robert Wellington's eyes. This wasn't about appreciating music. This was about proving a point. And she was going to be the example they used to prove it. As 8 p.m. approached, Rosa could hear voices from the private dining room. The guests were arriving, and soon it would be time for her to face whatever they had planned. She took one last look at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, straightened her uniform, and tried to calm her racing heart. In a few minutes, everything would change. Either she would prove that she really was the failed musician they thought she was, or she would show them something they weren't expecting. Rosa wasn't sure which outcome scared her more. At exactly 8 p.m., Rosa stood outside the private dining room, her hands trembling as she smoothed down her black uniform. Through the frosted glass doors, she could hear the sound of laughter and conversation. Wine glasses clinked together, and she caught fragments of discussions about business deals and vacation homes. Mr. Romano appeared beside her, straightening his tie. "Ready?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. The guests were waiting, and there was no backing out now. Rosa nodded, not trusting her voice. Her mouth felt dry, and her heart was beating so fast she was sure everyone would be able to hear it. The private dining room had been transformed for the evening. Candles flickered on every table, casting warm shadows on the walls. Fresh flowers replaced the usual fake arrangements, and the good china gleamed under the soft lighting. About 20 people sat around tables arranged in a horseshoe shape, with the piano positioned at the open end like a stage. Robert Wellington sat at the head table, wearing an expensive suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Rosa recognized some of the faces from his previous visits. Dr. Phillips, the music professor, was there, along with the woman with the pearl necklace. But there were new faces, too. People she'd never seen before who looked at her with curious expressions. A man with a notebook sat near the back, the reporter Mr. Romano had mentioned. Rosa's stomach dropped even further. Whatever happened tonight would be written about in the newspaper for everyone in the city to read. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Romano announced, stepping into the center of the room, "thank you all for joining us at Romano's this evening. As promised, we have a special treat for you. Our employee Rosa has graciously agreed to share her musical talents with us." A polite round of applause filled the room, but Rosa could see the smirks on some faces. They weren't applauding her talent. They were applauding the entertainment they expected to receive. "Rosa studied classical piano in college," Mr. Romano continued. And tonight she'd be performing some pieces for your enjoyment. More applause. And Rosa forced herself to walk toward the piano. Her legs felt weak, and she was grateful when she finally reached the bench. She sat down and adjusted her position, trying to remember everything her piano teacher had taught her about posture and hand position. The room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes watched her every move, waiting for her to begin. Rosa looked down at the keys, and for a terrifying moment her mind went completely blank. She couldn't remember how the Chopin waltz started. She couldn't remember anything. Then, almost without thinking, her right hand found middle C. She pressed the key gently, and the note rang out clear and true in the quiet room. The familiar sound calmed her nerves slightly, and suddenly the opening measures of the waltz came flooding back to her memory. Rosa began to play. The first notes were tentative, careful. Her fingers felt stiff, and she was hyper-aware of every sound she made. But as she moved into the main theme of the waltz, something began to change. The music started to flow more naturally, and her body remembered what it felt like to play. The Chopin Minute Waltz unfolded in the candlelit room, like a story being told. The playful opening melody danced through the air, light and graceful. Rosa's left hand provided the steady waltz rhythm, while her right hand spun out the delicate ornaments and runs that made the piece so charming. She could feel the audience's attention shifting. The whispered conversations had stopped completely. Even the clinking of wine glasses had ceased. The only sound in the room was the piano, and Rosa felt a familiar joy begin to warm her chest. This was why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. This moment when the notes came alive and told their story. As the piece moved into its more dramatic middle section, Rosa's confidence grew. Her fingers found their old agility, dancing across the keys with increasing assurance. The music swelled and diminished, rose and fell, carrying everyone in the room along with its emotional journey. She had forgotten how good it felt to perform, to share music with other people. In college, she had loved the moment when an audience became completely absorbed in what she was playing, when the barrier between performer and listener dissolved and everyone experienced the music together. But this audience was different. As Rosa played, she began to sense a change in the room's atmosphere. The smug anticipation she'd felt when she walked in was being replaced by something else, surprise, perhaps even respect. Dr. Phillips, who had been so dismissive of her abilities, just days before was leaning forward in his chair, his eyebrows raised in concentration. The woman with the pearls had stopped whispering to her companion and was watching Rosa's hands move across the keys. Even Robert Wellington's confident smirk was fading into something that looked almost like concern. Rosa reached the technical climax of the piece, where rapid scales and arpeggios demanded precise fingerwork and perfect timing. This was the section she'd been most worried about, the part where amateur players usually stumbled and revealed their limitations. But her hours of practice paid off. Her fingers flew across the keys with accuracy and grace, each note clear and perfectly placed. The music filled every corner of the room, transforming the space from a restaurant dining room into something that felt almost sacred. Rosa lost herself in the performance, forgetting about the audience, forgetting about her uniform, forgetting about everything except the joy of making music. As she played the final section, bringing back the playful opening theme but with added complexity and depth, Rosa felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in years. This was who she really was, beneath the server's apron and the daily struggle to pay bills. This was the musician she had trained to become, the artist who had never really disappeared despite everything that had happened. The last notes of the waltz rang out in the silent room, hanging in the air like a question waiting to be answered. Rosa lifted her hands from the keys and sat perfectly still, suddenly aware again of where she was and what had just happened. For a long moment no one moved. The silence stretched on, and Rosa began to worry that something had gone wrong. Had she made mistakes she wasn't aware of? Had the performance been as amateur as everyone expected? Then, slowly, someone began to clap. It was an older gentleman Rosa didn't recognize, sitting near the middle of the room. His applause was quiet but sincere, and gradually other people joined in. The clapping grew stronger and more enthusiastic. Filling the room with genuine appreciation, Dr. Phillips was applauding with obvious amazement on his face. The woman with the pearls was clapping with tears in her eyes. Even some of the waitstaff who had gathered in the doorway were joining in the applause. Rosa stood up from the piano bench, hardly believing what was happening. These were the same people who had come to mock her, to prove that she was delusional about her abilities. But something had changed. The music had changed everything. Only Robert Wellington remained seated, his hands motionless on the table. His face had gone pale, and he was staring at Rosa as if seeing her for the first time. The confident, cruel man who had orchestrated this whole evening suddenly looked very small and very uncomfortable. The applause continued for what felt like forever, and Rosa felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like herself again. The applause slowly faded, but the silence that followed felt completely different from the expectant quiet before Rosa had played. This was a silence full of respect, wonder, and perhaps even shame. 20 people sat in a restaurant dining room, but they might as well have been in a concert hall after witnessing something extraordinary. Rosa remained standing beside the piano, hardly daring to move. Her heart was still racing, but now it was from the joy of performing rather than fear. She looked out at the faces in front of her and saw expressions she hadn't expected: admiration, surprise, and something that looked very much like regret. Dr. Phillips was the first to speak. He stood up slowly, his face flushed with what Rosa realized was embarrassment. He began, then stopped, seeming to struggle for words. That was a truly professional performance. The technical execution was flawless, and your interpretation showed real musical maturity. The words hung in the air like an apology. This was the same man who had called her technically deficient just days before, who had dismissed her abilities without ever hearing her play. Now he was looking at her with the respect he would show any accomplished musician. "I owe you an apology," Dr. Phillips continued, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet room. "I made assumptions about your abilities based on prejudice. That was wrong of me." A woman Rosa didn't recognize stood up next. She was elegantly dressed and carried herself with the confidence of someone used to cultural events. "I'm Catherine Martinez from the City Arts Council," she said. "I had no idea we were going to hear something so beautiful tonight." "Have you considered performing publicly? We're always looking for local talent for our concert series." Rosa felt dizzy. The City Arts Council was one of the most prestigious cultural organizations in town. They sponsored concerts at the best venues and worked with professional musicians. A week ago, she would have thought an invitation from them was impossible. I haven't performed publicly in years," Rosa managed to say. "Well, you should," Catherine said firmly. "What we just heard was concert-quality work. Your technique is excellent, and you have a real gift for bringing emotion to the music." More people began to speak up. A man who owned several art galleries in the city offered to help her network with other musicians. A woman who taught private piano lessons asked if Rosa would be interested in taking on some students. The reporter from the newspaper was scribbling notes frantically, his earlier smirk replaced by genuine interest. Through it all, Robert Wellington sat frozen at his table. His face had gone from pale to red as he realized how dramatically his plan had backfired. He had invited these people to witness what he thought would be a humiliating failure. Instead, they had witnessed something that revealed his own cruelty and small-mindedness. Finally, Robert stood up. The room fell quiet again, and Rosa felt her stomach tighten. Even after her successful performance, she was still afraid of what he might say. "Well," Robert said, his voice strained, "that was unexpected." He looked around the room at the faces of his guests, many of whom were now looking at him with obvious disapproval. These were his friends and business associates, people whose opinions mattered to him. And they had just watched him orchestrate a cruel joke that had backfired spectacularly. "I think I owe everyone here an explanation," Robert continued, his confident demeanor cracking. "And Rosa, I owe you a very serious apology." Rosa waited, not trusting herself to speak. "I brought everyone here tonight because I thought I thought it would be amusing to watch someone with delusions of grandeur embarrass herself. I was wrong? Completely terribly wrong. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Several of his guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly disturbed by his honesty about his motives. "You're not just a good pianist," Robert said to Rosa. "You're an exceptional one. What I heard tonight would be impressive in any venue, by any standard. And I'm ashamed of how I've treated you." Rosa felt tears beginning to form in her eyes again, but these were different tears. For weeks, this man had made her question everything about herself, her abilities, her dreams. Now he was publicly acknowledging what she had always known deep down, that she was a real musician, regardless of what job she needed to pay her bills. Mr. Romano, who had been standing quietly by the door throughout the performance, stepped forward. His expression was complicated, part pride, part surprise, part worry about what this meant for his business. "Rosa," he said, "I had no idea you could play like that. If I had known—" "You never asked," Rosa replied quietly but without anger. It was simply a statement of fact. Catherine Martinez approached Rosa with a business card. "I meant what I said about the concert series. We have an opening in 6 weeks for a solo piano recital. If you're interested, I'd love to discuss it with you." Rosa took the card with shaking hands. 6 weeks ago, she had been serving this woman dinner and being mocked for her musical dreams. Now she was being offered a chance to perform as a featured artist. "I'd like that very much," Rosa said, over. The next hour, as the evening wound down, person after person approached Rosa. Some offered apologies for their earlier assumptions. Others offered opportunities, teaching positions, performance gigs, connections to other musicians. The reporter asked for an interview about her story. Jenny appeared at Rosa's side as the last guests were leaving. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered. "It's like something out of a movie." "I can't believe it either," Rosa admitted. "This morning I was just a waitress who used to play piano. Now you're a pianist who happens to work as a waitress," Jenny corrected. "There's a big difference." As Rosa helped clean up the dining room, she caught her reflection in the window. She was still wearing her uniform, still technically on the clock at Romano's. But everything had changed. The woman looking back at her wasn't hiding anymore. Mr. Romano pulled her aside as she was getting ready to leave. "Rosa, about your schedule. If you're going to be performing and teaching, you might need more flexibility. We can work something out." Rosa realized he was offering to accommodate her musical career, something that would have been unthinkable a few hours earlier. But she also realized something else. She didn't want to hide her music anymore, didn't want to squeeze it into the leftover hours of her life. "Actually, Mr. Romano, I think I need to give you my 2 weeks' notice." He looked surprised, though perhaps not entirely shocked. "Are you sure? These opportunities might not work out?" "They might not," Rosa agreed, "but I need to try. I've spent 3 years convinced that I wasn't good enough, that my dreams were unrealistic. Tonight proved that the only thing unrealistic was my willingness to give up on them." Walking home that night, Rosa felt like she was seeing her city with new eyes. The same streets that had felt like a trap just hours earlier now felt full of possibility. Her phone was buzzing with text messages from people she'd met that evening, following up on their offers and invitations. When she got to her apartment, Rosa went straight to her piano. She pulled off the dusty cover and sat down at the bench. The keys were still out of tune, but that didn't matter anymore. She had rediscovered something more valuable than perfect pitch. She had rediscovered herself. As her fingers found the opening notes of a new piece, Rosa smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new music. But tonight, for the first time in years, she was exactly who she was meant to be.